Nobody photographed André Beneteau. There is no famous image, no iconic moment, no Brigitte Bardot leaning against one of his boats off the coast of Saint-Tropez, no Shah of Iran placing an order, no Hollywood actor pulling up to a dock in something he built, no magazine cover, no documentary, no museum named after him in a town that still whispers about the man who saved it. There is only a shed, a pencil, a drawing board, and 30 years of boats that the world never stopped to look at, even though the men who fished out of them knew, in the way that working men always know, that something extraordinary had been placed in their hands. That is the André Beneteau story, and it is the most quietly important story in this entire industry. His father Benjamin had built the company from the absolute bottom of nothing in 1884. A ship's boy at 12, his own boatyard, by his early 20s, in the French port town of Croix de Vie, fishing boats for working men. When Benjamin put the first engine on a fishing vessel, the women of the town waited outside with stones. They believed the noise would frighten the fish. He named the second engine-powered boat La Paix, the Peace, because that is what it cost him just to survive one idea. Then the Great War came and took everything. The yard went silent. The boats stopped. France bled out across the trenches, and Croix de Vie waited for something that might never return. That is what André inherited in 1928. That silence, that rubble, that name. He is 21 years old. Think about that number for a moment. 21 years old, inheriting a boatyard destroyed by a world war, in a town still recovering from the same devastation, with no capital, no established workforce, no reputation left to spend, and a fishing industry already beginning its long, quiet decline toward irrelevance. His first customer is a single fisherman, one man, with faith and not much else, who walks into the yard and places a small order for a fishing boat. André could have built that boat quickly. He could have built it cheaply. He could have done exactly what the economics of 1928 demanded. Get it done, get paid, survive another week. No one would have blamed him. No one was watching. No one was grading him. The fisherman just needed a boat that floated and moved. But André built it the way he would build every boat for the next 30 years. He drew it first, by hand, every line considered, every proportion examined, not because anyone asked him to, not because there was a customer demanding beauty, but because André Beneteau was constitutionally incapable of building something that was not worthy of the sea it was going into. On the day that first boat launched, the entire town of Croix de Vie came to the water. They were stunned. Not because it floated. Boats are supposed to float. They were stunned because it was beautiful. A fishing boat, the most functional, graceless, purely utilitarian category of vessel that exists on this earth, drawn with the proportion and care of something that deserved to be admired. Neighbors stood on the dock and looked at it the way people look at things they did not expect to move them. André did not plan that reaction. It was simply how he built things. He went back to the shed. He started on the next one. What followed was 30 years of the same thing. Through the 1930s, when Europe was pulling itself toward another catastrophe, and the French economy was grinding under its own weight, André stayed in the yard. He drew. He built. He drew again. Each vessel came out of his hands with the same attention that the first one had received from a sold 21-year-old who had inherited rubble and refused to build anything less than something worthy. Then the Second World War arrived. France fell in 1940. German occupation settled over the country like a stone. The fishing industry, already weakened, already shrinking, nearly disappeared entirely. The yard in Croix de Vie went through the same silence it had endured after the First War, the same stopped breath, the same waiting. But this time, André had something his father never had. 30 years of accumulated skill. 30 years of accumulated trust, a reputation that had spread quietly through every fishing port on the Atlantic coast, not because André had marketed it, not because he had chased it, but because the boats he built were simply better than anything else available. Working men talked to each other. Fishermen who trusted their lives to hulls in North Atlantic weather knew the difference between a boat built to survive the sea and a boat built to survive until the invoice was paid. André's boats survived the sea. When the war ended and France came back to itself, piece by broken piece, it was André Beneteau who rebuilt Croix de Vie's entire fishing fleet, almost single-handedly. Vessel by vessel, hull by hull. Coming back to the same shed, the same drawing board, the same question that had guided every single thing he had built since that first fisherman walked through the door in 1928. Is this boat worthy of the sea? Not, will this boat sell? Not, neighbors would walk past the yard just to look at his drawings pinned to the wall. He never charged them to look. He never asked anyone to notice. He went back inside and kept working. Here is what separates André Bénéteau from every other man in this story. Carlo Riva burned for recognition from the very beginning. He wanted the Aquarama photographed in every magazine on the Côte d'Azur. He wanted Bardot on the bow and the Shah of Iran on the phone. He wanted the press to call it the Ferrari of the sea. He built obsessively and brilliantly. No one in this industry built more beautifully than Carlo Riva, but he built with one eye always on whether the world was watching. Orrin Edson, who built Bayliner into the largest boat company on earth, wanted scale. 1,000 boats a week, 24 plants, a Forbes number next to his name. Chris Smith built in Michigan because he wanted his name on every lake in America. Robert Braithwaite wanted James Bond. They all wanted something the world could see. André Bénéteau wanted the boat to be right. That was the entire ambition. Not recognition, not scale, not legacy, not a Forbes valuation, or a celebrity photograph, or a journalist calling his product the Stradivarius of anything. Just the boat, and whether it was worthy. That is so rare in this industry, in any industry, that it almost does not compute, because every other person in this story eventually let the outside world into the room where the decisions were made. Eventually the market got a vote. Eventually the corporation arrived, with its question about margin, and portfolio coverage, and brand positioning. Eventually the man who built the thing stopped asking his own question, and started answering someone else's. André never let anyone else into the room. He was so completely absorbed in the single question of whether the boat was worthy, that there was simply no space left for any other question to enter. By the early 1960s, the fishing industry was collapsing. Not slowly, not gently. It was falling apart under the weight of global economic change that no amount of craftsmanship could hold back. Less fishing meant less boats. The market that had sustained the Bénéteau yard for 3 generations was shrinking beneath André's feet, and there was nothing a man with a pencil and a drawing board could do to stop it. He did not panic. He handed his children, Annette and André Jr., a dying company, a lifetime of accumulated knowledge about how things should be built, and a quiet experiment he had been running on the side with a new material that nobody in Croix Devai quite understood yet, polyester fiberglass. He had been making small dinghies out of it, testing it the way he tested everything. Not from a commercial angle, not from a market research perspective, but from the only angle that ever mattered to him. Could this be made worthy of the sea? He decided it could. He showed his children how to work with it. He gave them the material, the standard, and the 30 years of accumulated judgment that stood behind both. And then he stepped back. What Annette and André Jr. did next is where the story shifts from quiet to extraordinary. It is 1965 Paris, the National Boat Show, France's biggest gathering of marine industry professionals, dealers, and buyers. A room full of people who think they already know what a boat looks like. Annette and André Jr. bring 2 fiberglass pleasure boats, the Guppy, the FL Tan, small, clean, precisely proportioned, built from a new material using an old standard, the same standard their father had applied to 30 years of fishing vessels in a shed nobody visited. The doors open. Within hours, 3 businessmen are standing in front of the boats arguing over distribution rights. Not negotiating, politely arguing, because each of them can see immediately that what is sitting in front of them is not a product. It is a category. Something the French pleasure boating market has been waiting for without knowing it was waiting. Affordable, seaworthy, built with a seriousness that the competition has never bothered to bring to this price point. By the end of the show, Bénéteau has distribution contracts that will keep the factory running for the next 6 months. By the end of the decade, Bénéteau has become one of the most respected pleasure boat builders in Europe. By 1976, the First 30, a racing sailboat designed by André Mauric, wins Boat of the Year at the Paris show, and takes the first leg of the Figaro single-handed race. The company that spent 80 years building fishing boats for working men is now winning races. By 1984, Bénéteau is listed on the Paris Stock Exchange. The founding family retains majority control. By 1986, there is a factory in South Carolina. Bénéteau is no longer a French company that exports. It is a global company that manufactures. By 1990, that American plant has produced its 1,000th boat. In 1995, Bénéteau acquires Jeanneau, its oldest French rival, the only other name in the country that could claim comparable history and scale. Two families from the Vendée, who had spent decades watching each other across the market, sit down and decide that the future belongs to both of them together. It is the largest moment in French boating history, and it happens without a single celebrity, without a single famous boat, without a single photograph anyone outside the industry will ever recognize. Today, the Bénéteau Group owns 9 brands. It operates factories on 3 continents. It is the largest producer of yachts on Earth. The founding family still controls more than 57%. Annette Roux, André's daughter, Benjamin's granddaughter, built it with the same stubbornness her father carried into that shed every morning for 30 years. And here is the irony that the press releases will never say out loud. The man who made all of it possible is the least famous person connected to any of it. You can visit a Bénéteau dealership in 40 countries. You can sail a Bénéteau yacht across the Atlantic. You can read the company history on the website, full of dates and milestones and acquisitions and awards. And nowhere in any of it will you find a photograph of André at his drawing board. Nowhere will you find a quote that became famous. Nowhere will you find the scene, and it happened. It absolutely happened, of a 21-year-old standing at a dock in Croix, watching a town full of people go quiet in front of a fishing boat because it was more beautiful than a fishing boat had any right to be. That scene belongs to history now, to silence, to the category of things that occurred without witnesses who knew they were witnessing something. There is one detail that stays with you when you dig far enough into this story. André drew every boat himself, by hand, every single one for 30 years, not because he lacked the resources to hire draftsmen, but because the drawing was not a step in the process for André Bénéteau. The drawing was the commitment. The moment where the question, "Is this boat worthy of the sea?" got answered before a single piece of wood was cut or a single rivet was set. He could not outsource that moment. It would have been like outsourcing the conscience. So he drew every morning for 30 years, in a shed in a small French port town while the world looked somewhere else entirely. While Carlo Riva was photographing his boats with film stars on the Mediterranean. While Chris Smith was shipping mahogany runabouts to Vanderbilts and DuPonts. While the American industry was building empires measured in thousands of boats per week, André was in the shed, drawing the next one. He stepped away quietly in the mid-1960s. No announcement, no ceremony, no farewell tour, no famous last words recorded for posterity. Just a man who walked out of a shed he had worked in for 30 years and left the keys on the table. Nobody wrote about it. Nobody photographed the moment. It was not the kind of moment that gets photographed. It was too quiet, too dignified, too completely without drama for a world that only pays attention to the dramatic. Today, when people talk about the great boat builders of the 20th century, they say Carlo Riva, they say Chris Smith, they say Cornelius Ray. They say the names that come attached to celebrity and scale and famous objects and famous disasters. They do not say André Bénéteau. But here is what is also true. Every boat Bénéteau builds today, every hull, every line, every quality decision made when cost would have been easier, every moment where a designer chose to do it right, instead of doing it fast, carries the invisible fingerprint of a man who rebuilt France's entire Atlantic fishing fleet after a world war with nothing but a pencil, and the absolute refusal to build anything that was not worthy of the sea it was going into. The empire his children built stands on ground he prepared for 30 years without ever once looking up to check if anyone was watching. Carlo Riva became a legend because he demanded to be one. He built in mahogany and chrome and obsession, and made absolutely certain the world had its eyes open. André Bénéteau became the foundation of something larger than a legend because he never once looked up from the drawing board. He just built the boats, and that, in the end, turned out to be enough.